So my name is Cara Sappington. I am the Associate Director of the Corban Language Institute and International Student Support as well. So with my role, I do mostly higher education, including coordinating curriculum for our IELP program that's both in person. We have hybrid and we have fully remote students that are in their home nation. We also do a number of programs, including being able to help with curriculum for some of our international partners, including right now we're working on curriculum for an online junior high program. And so there's kind of a few avenues that I've been working on related to course design. So this workshop, Introduction to Instructional Design for Online Courses, it's definitely an introduction level. I am definitely in the process of continuing to learn. Again, my background is in intercultural studies and TESOL with my master's, and I'm currently enrolled in a doctorate program where I'm focusing on intercultural education. And my particular focus that I'm trying to specialize in within that program is online learning. And so it's definitely something that I'm interested in. And, you know, I think all of us agreed in our plenary time that things are continuing to change in the field of English language learning, and just trying to think about what is best for our language learners going forward with online opportunities. So throughout kind of the next few times, about 45 minutes that we'll have together today, I'll try to just highlight what are some ideas and principles related to online course design, and try to show just really specific examples to help you visualize what have some instructors or programs done with their course design to be able to set a course and up for success within a program. And then we'll also try to have a time just for discussion and again for sharing as well. So we will be able to preview some templates and be able to just share whatever other resources that you've encountered with instructional design tools for online learning as well. So just to kind of start out and kind of get us thinking about, here's a quote. What are learners supposed to do after learning the course? Figure that out and build the appropriate and interactive elements. So what do you guys kind of think about that quote? Do you guys agree, disagree? What are some things that makes you think of? Feel free to comment in the chat, or if you want to unmute, you're welcome to as well. I see if you agree, you want real world application and connections.
Is this like the learning objectives? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, it could be. Do you think that that's helpful or relevant?
I think it's good to have an endpoint, because then you can make a path to it. So you can know the journey that you want to take.
Yeah, kind of what are your expectations even, right? Yeah, I see a lot of comments coming up regarding kind of backwards design. So we'll kind of bring that up again at the end and kind of share what's worked. Is that something that's been working for you as well? So there's a number of different instructional design models that I'm sure each of you have used or that you've come across. I'm going to highlight just a few examples, and I don't necessarily feel like there's one, one right way. I think it's really figuring out, is there a model that your institution or the nonprofit that you're a part of has already adapted to be kind of consistent across staff and faculty, or is there one that just fits you well and is able to kind of work with your style? This particular design goes through analysis, design, development, implementation, evaluation. This particular design is one that for a lot of people was kind of an early implementer in design. There's some people that have felt like, is there debate on its effectiveness or appropriateness for really meeting student needs? Or does it really help to encompass all of the stages? Is there a continuous evaluation? There's also kind of ones called like, this particular one is called the DIME. And again, you'll notice kind of as you start looking at instructional design models, there are a lot of themes and threads that will go through all of them. So with the DIME model, the first layer is design, which is really the course planning, writing good objectives like we were just talking about in our discussion. The next layer is interaction. And this is kind of where that learner-focused environment would come in. The layer of media would include what's the content, what technology are we using, and some of those media elements. And then evaluation encompasses a lot of things in this particular model, including the online learning that's taking place with the student, the instructor effectiveness, and overall the course quality. So there's a lot of different layers that they would kind of all include within this particular one. Another model is called the 6P. So again, each model kind of has different quantity of layers or kind of the wording, but again, you're going to see a lot of these same themes as far as what's the design, what are you producing, what are you evaluating as you go through each of these different models. Within this model, again, there are 6 Ps, which are plan, prepare, produce, proof, practice, and perform. And I'll highlight a few examples of some of these stages as we go through together. And I'll also provide an example checklist at the end as well that you could use or adapt based on your particular setting or the types of courses that you would be leading out on. So again, I'll provide a link to this at the end, but this QR code will take you to a PDF handout that has a checklist as well as some other screenshots and some links to some helpful URLs and course design websites and other materials as well. So feel free to capture that if you want. So today we're going to be thinking about going through what is the model. So again, there's many different, as we look at the DIME model, as we look at the 6P model, as we look at backward design, as we look at integrating Bloom's taxonomy, what is the model that would work best for you? I know throughout the presentation in our plenary, we talked about sometimes simple is better. You want to be able to find something, again, that works well for you and is a natural fit for the type of organization that you're in. I will share a screenshot as well. Sorry if the URL isn't working. Feel free to email me afterwards and I can send you the PDF as well. I'm also going to be screen sharing it in a little bit so you can kind of go through it together. We also want to think about our needs, and that's kind of basically maybe doing a needs analysis, thinking about if you're starting a new program or a new course, who would be the audience, or you're thinking about what's the purpose of this course. And then we'll go into planning, preparing, producing, proof, practice, perform, and evaluate. And again, I'll provide a few examples of some of those today. So again, the first kind of phase that we're looking at is really planning the course. And so that's thinking about what is the course that we would be offering? What's the level? Is it a remedial course? Is it a course for credit, for non-credit? What's the setting? Being able to kind of really think about the context, being able to think about the course description. What's the purpose of the course? What's the format? Is it going to be a hybrid course? Is it a face-to-face course? Is it a fully remote course? Again, that's probably going to influence the type of decisions that you're making as we start to go further along in the planning process on even how you're teaching, how you're assessing, or what types of technology you're integrating within the course. That might also influence the resources that you're selecting. I know for some of our courses that are fully remote, some of the students in their home nations have had problems with accessing books. We're not able to send them ebooks through Google or through Amazon because of some international blocking. Sometimes we can do ebooks through a publisher. And so we have to think about not only internet speed, but also access to materials as we're selecting our textbooks, depending on where our students are and the access that they have. Are you using open source materials? Are you using publisher materials? So being able to kind of make some of those decisions can be helpful, as well as we talked about the learning outcomes. And I know Donna brought this up earlier in the chat as well, being able to know where are we kind of heading, and that can help us make some decisions. And so this is really that planning stage. And for some of you, your institutions or the organization that you might be working on kind of hands you all of this information. and you can kind of take it from there. For others that are really kind of more at the ground level in creating courses, you might be the one that are actually producing these outcomes or objectives and making the textbook selections. There's links here again. Oftentimes it's helpful when we're making course objectives, again, to make sure, are they measurable, and do they fit the level that we're at, and what's needing to be accomplished with that particular course. So this is what we're talking about at kind of that planning stage. From there, getting a little bit more detailed, and this is the part that I'm not sure all of us actually necessarily take the time to get to. I know sometimes I've just kind of jumped from the planning stage to developing my syllabus, but I haven't always taken the time throughout the semesters to do course mapping. I know we've talked a lot about, as we've gone into online design, it's been difficult to manage the planning time, the teaching time, and all of those elements. But it also really helps set you up for success when you have a strong course map to make sure that you're very strategic in your alignment, that you have proper accommodations throughout the semester, and especially if you have a pre-published course, that everything's really set out for students as you're preparing for them. So what does a course map look like? What's the purpose of it? One element is a course map just really helps to even create a roadmap of the semester of your particular course or the session that you're going to be doing. It helps demonstrate that alignment that we've been talking about of a path from activities to assessment to supplemental resources to the learning outcomes and how all of that might work together. It really helps to focus on what's most important. There's always, I feel like, more resources than we could use between the textbook resources and supplemental resources and just practice and production activities. We want to really, again, come back to what's the most important things for the course and for students and their goals. And depending on how you learn and structure, it can really just help create a visual outline of what, what's helpful. So again, an important part is really alignment kind of through that. Has anyone created course maps for any of the classes that they've taught before? You can raise your hand if you have. So I'm going to show you just a few different examples. Some of these are for content classes. Some of these will be for English language classes. So you can see some of the variety of what this could look like. So again, a course map is really just a visual. This is often a step even before creating the syllabus that someone would do. There are some maps that can be created through some free or low source programs online. You can also just create, I'll show you also one that's just been created in Word. So it's really kind of a personal preference. I see one that says Coggle. Yeah, Coggle's a great resource to be able to create those. So here's an example on this particular course. They thought about, again, who is the creator, what were going to be the outcomes, what were they wanting to have in their syllabus. As they're creating a syllabus for an online course, a lot of times there's a lot more details than there are even in a face-to-face course, just because students are not able to maybe ask as many questions or follow up depending on the format of the course or what synchronous components there are within that. So a lot of times people will put additional sections. Maybe they'll even do a recording of the syllabus once they've recorded it. They also kind of go through and think about, based on the course objectives, what are going to be the main types of assignments that I want to do? What would be kind of the weekly outline, or each week, what are the things that we're always going to do? Okay, in this particular one, they're always doing readings, they're always doing a practice activity, a discussion, and a live session. So that's kind of the main format for this particular teacher. And then they actually outline the modules that they would be covering throughout this course. Here's another format example. So again, it just shows you the variety of what this could look like based on what program that you're creating this in and what makes sense to you as you just kind of map out and think about the course. I see Tim mentions he's done outlines. and really looked at activities, assessments, objectives, and how those would all be aligned together. That's great to be able to take the step to do that. So again, you'll see some similar elements in this screenshot where they did kind of map out the course overview. They looked at the syllabus and the course design, but it's maybe not quite as detailed as the other mapping that was done. Here's an example that was created for an English language course. This one was just created on Word, so it's a little bit more simple, just using some of the templates that they have there. Again, looking at the syllabus, this is a more online detailed syllabus. It's also looking at resources. I know in our plenary today, he kind of mentioned not only setting realistic goals, but also thinking about what technology and activities would really be useful. So there's a lot of options to choose from, but really thinking about what are the ones that you would really utilize, that would be best for you to be effective as an instructor, that would be most effective to help support learner needs, and not to add something just because it's a new technology, but that it's really helpful for you and the students and for meeting the goals of the course. And again, maybe there are some additional technology pieces that you decide to add in. This isn't something that's set in stone, but again, it helps you to really think about being purposeful on what technology are you incorporating and why. This particular course was actually not using Zoom, but using Microsoft Teams. For this particular program was what they used for even kind of their LMS and for their live Zoom calls. This was a course that was had 2 sessions of live synchronous and a kind of an office hours study hall format. So 100% of the class was remote. They were using Teams, they were using Microsoft Office because of that for creating Word documents, journals. Everything was being uploaded through Teams. They were also using an ebook. They were using videos. They were using Kahoot for warm-ups. And weekly, their activities typically would have readings. They would have discussions. They would have a vocabulary log the students would do. They would have practice, and there would be live sessions. And then for key assessments, they mostly did quizzes for each unit. And then they did a summary and response and an essay versus a midterm and final. For this course, they did more by units. For this particular course, because of the objectives that they were wanting to focus on, that included some things like character development and other just academic skills. And due to the number of content hours that the students were expected to have, the instructor didn't feel like we necessarily had time to really go through all 10 chapters of the book. And so they really looked at, to choose these chapters with the asterisk, they came back to those objectives. And in addition to the objectives, looked at the content of the chapters and thought about, okay, based on these particular English language learners that I have in this class, which content chapters might be most culturally appropriate and interesting for the age group and for the students I have, and what lessons within the scope and sequence of the textbook would also most correlate for the objectives of the course. And so that's kind of how for this particular one, we kind of narrowed down what are the units that we're going to focus on if we don't feel like we have time to really explore the whole book together. So again, this is another just format example of kind of a course mapping. And this kind of one doesn't really take that much time. But again, we want to kind of come back to think about some, like as Randall said, sometimes less is better when we're planning some of the resources, some of the supplemental, and think about what's supporting students, what can be maintained across the semester, and thinking about just what's going to be most beneficial for that course. So from there, this is where a lot of the more detailed planning would come in. And just like I've kind of mentioned already, some of this would include, what are you, as you're kind of planning the details from your course map, you want to think about the style of the course, how much are you using the textbook, if at all, what activities and homework will be coming up, how will the different paces and learning styles be accommodated, what formative practice might happen, and then what are those summative assessments that you would have within the course. And I know Tim and some others kind of brought this up in the chat, that was something that they had worked on. Here's one example of an instructor. This was a follow-up from one of the course maps that we saw. This is what they created. And each of the modules, under that, you can see what are the activities that they did under that model. What was the key topic? What were the format of the classes? What was the type of assessment? What were the resources that were used for this particular course? Again, this example is a content class, but it again kind of gives you an idea of kind of looking at each model and what are the key pieces within that module, and then tracking that across the session. Here's another, just a blank template. And again, this will be provided on the PDF that I can email out as well. And I'll screen share in a little bit. So this is an example template. And when we talk about, I know a few people brought up the idea of backward design. So when we're thinking about, again, what are those learning objectives? One thing that I like to think about is sometimes I'll even plan out my summative assessment or kind of my larger tasks first. And then think about, okay, well, what practice are students needing to really be able to hone those skills or be able to apply it to a new situation or have that real experience? What are some things that we need to prepare and practice and expose them to ahead of time to be able to be ready for that point? Whether that's preparing them for, a writing task, or sometimes for a speaking and listening. Again, I want to think about, if we're having them do a presentation, what type of practice, what type of outlining and brainstorming are we having them do ahead of time? So this particular template, again, just has different columns that would be filled in. What week, the unit, what particular course learning outcome are you really focusing on that week? And then going even smaller, what specific learning outcomes or kind of sub objectives would you be looking at? And again, that part of that might be coming from what you're scaffolding. Some of that might come from what units that you're covering in the textbook or other supplemental resources you're doing. You would highlight what learning materials you're needing, what activities are being able to, that you're planning on doing that week to have learner engagement, and what assessments or rubrics would be needed. Depending on your course and your requirements as an institution, for some institutions, you need to do detailed lesson plans for each class. And for some instructors, that's just helpful for you to have. It's helpful for you to be able to pass off if you have a sub. There's also, for me, just as a reality with planning, I've often gone more to this type of model where I have just kind of a detailed, almost like a scope and sequence for me. And I would also put in even like the hyperlinks if I'm doing videos, or I would have this as almost my master lesson plan that I would kind of come back to and sometimes make comments to, and then create, PowerPoints or things like that as well. So personally, I don't usually write out detailed lesson plans for every course in every class that I would be teaching, and usually do more of a format like this. And I would, again, add in details as I go. But again, it's figuring out kind of what works for you and what's realistic based on your time and the expectations of the program that you're working with. As we're choosing those activities, again, one thing we want to come back to is those objectives. And we also want to think about, based on the course, what's the level, what are those objectives? What are the appropriate points of a Bloom's taxonomy or critical thinking do we want to be able to have students accomplish? So sometimes it's helpful to kind of compare this when we're looking back at our assessments, whether that's our formative assessments, whether that's our summative assessments, being able to just kind of have a self-check on what levels are we doing activities. Sometimes it can be natural to kind of stick around the remembering, understanding. And sometimes that's just because that's the level that the students are in their language program and what they're really able to produce. But sometimes it's also just that's a natural area when we're doing vocabulary activities or things like that. We just, again, want to come back to what are we wanting students to be able to accomplish by the end of the semester. So for vocabulary, for instance, in addition to sometimes the matching or close activities, maybe I want them to be able to actually create sentences. So I might have them, use a word in a sentence, but then I want to even advance them anymore. Sometimes I'll ask a question with a synonym in it, and they have to use a specific vocabulary word to answer that question. So that even activates a different level of critical thinking, being able to understand the question, be able to answer it, and add in details that they show they recognize that word and the meaning of the word to answer that question. Or again, for vocabulary, if there's a certain word list that we've had, sometimes I'll have them write a short essay and they have to select a certain amount of those vocabulary words that were given to incorporate within their essay and maybe highlight those in bold or in colors. But being able to compare the assessments that we've chosen with the layers of Bloom taxonomy can just be a helpful check to see, okay, does this correlate with what you were thinking, what you were wanting students to do? It can sometimes just be a good self-check as you're coming back to your course. And kind of with that, we're going to go through a few examples again soon on how to do those self-checks and be able to really think about what am I doing, what have I created, and is it on track with what I was wanting, what the course objectives are, and what would be helpful for my students based on their level, the context, their age group, and all of those elements. So again, kind of as we're kind of thinking through this design, the first step that we were talking about was really just choosing that design model. Are we going through the DIME model? Are we going through the 6P? Are we kind of making our own combination? What's working for us? 2, thinking about the needs assessment. So what's the context? Who are the students? What type of course is needed? And being able to develop that. So for instance, this semester, there were students that were needing, taking classes at our institution, but long-term are wanting to transfer to be able to be pilots or to do different things in aviation. And so for that, I created an aviation English elective course. And so again, that was kind of assessing what are the students' goals in addition to just general academic English and being able to create something from that. From there, creating the plan. So looking at that big picture, what's the technology? What's the foundational things we need for the courses? What's the textbook? What are kind of the weekly types of activities? What are the larger assessments we're going to do? And being able to kind of large picture, look at that map or that road. From there, really preparing, creating the syllabus, creating the scope and sequence. And again, for some of you, this is going to be something that's provided by the institution, but so that would be an opportunity to really review that. Being able to produce. And so this is really where we're starting to create. That could be video lectures, that could be creating supplemental materials, or selecting maybe what activities we're choosing from the textbook or selected resources, and looking at assessments. The proof stage is one that I think sometimes can be hard in English language classes, because I feel like in our industry, things are a lot of times last minute. And so I don't know about you guys, but it can feel like sometimes, especially with adjunct teaching, all of a sudden you're teaching a course next week. Or with our international partners, we're not sure, do they have funding? Do they not have funding? Yes, we're launching 50 students in 3 weeks. And so I feel like compared to other parts of academia, I think we have a lot more ambiguity that we need to deal with, but we can still do our best to be prepared and to lean on each other and to lean on our expertise as much as possible to prepare, to edit our courses and to adapt them based on our student levels and the particular maybe cultural backgrounds that students are going to be coming from. Think about copyright and other restrictions as we're integrating articles or videos or other supplemental resources from online. And the practice stage is really kind of when we're starting to implement, whether that's creating an LMS page, whether that's, is it a Microsoft Teams? Is it a Canvas? Is it a Populi? Is it a Moodle? Being able to think about just where's the space that is going to be kind of your home for your online learning environment, and really setting that up to be a welcoming learning environment. And having what it means by a plot is really having a clear structure. So sometimes that's within an LMS having different modules. Sometimes that's separating week 1, week 2, week 3, but having a logical flow of your online learning environment where students know where to find information, when are things due, how to come to open office hours, or how to connect with their instructor if they have questions, and that it's just accessible for students. The perform stage is really just the ongoing process of that live teaching, whether that's synchronous or asynchronous or a hybrid approach. It's really that part where you're actually going through and continuing to teach the course. And throughout that, there's a continuing evaluation phase. And so that's something in addition to assessing the students and their learning objectives, we also want to be able to evaluate the course. And there's some people that will do that by a midterm kind of check-in. Maybe that's like a virtual quiz with multiple choice and maybe a short answer response on even maybe what activities students are finding most helpful. How are they feeling like they're learning objectives? A lot of it's kind of a self-assessment. Sometimes that can also be an opportunity to really gauge just where students are in questions that they haven't brought up yet for you, how they're accessing internet technology, if there's things going on at home that you don't know about that they'd be willing to share. It's just kind of a check-in time. These can also be done kind of in a shorter level. Like I know Randall talked about earlier today, using like a Polly or something like that, even on Zoom. You can do smaller check-ins as well on how familiar students are feeling about the content or the homework or what questions they might have. But it's just a chance to kind of do check-ins with students, being able to continually make sure all the links are working on the site. And then oftentimes you'll have an end of the semester evaluation, which would oftentimes look at the textbook, look at the overall course design, and be able to kind of assess based on the course, based on the supplemental material that were used, based on the instruction, what are things that you would want to continue doing, that you would change, that you might remove as you're moving forward in a course. So again, I'm sorry if the QR code isn't working. Again, my email is down here and I'm going to screen share in a minute a handout. The handout's going to really just go through, here's kind of a simplified example on, as we're designing courses, what are some of the things that we want to look for? We want to look for, again, how are the learning objectives being implemented? What are they? Are they something that are measurable and kind of fit the level in the course that we're teaching? What's the logical flow of content? How will this be presented in a way that's able to really engage learners and be able to help connect with them and help them to make connections to the topic? What are the ways that we'll be gathering feedback, again, through assessment or through evaluation? What will accessibility look like for students? And what are the different strategies that we'd be using as we go forward? And then I'm going to screen share an example checklist. It definitely looks long, it's 6 pages. But again, this would be something that you could use at the beginning of a session as you're course designing, and could be something that could be simplified as just a really simple checklist. So again, this just goes through some of the templates that I already highlighted on the PowerPoint, but it has a few additional websites and resources that would be helpful, and some of those questions to think through. And again, here's an example checklist. At the bottom, I also have a reference for a few other checklists that some institutions have developed. And this would be, again, something that you can customize on what makes sense for the type of program that you're in, the types of classes that you would be working with, and the type of LMS that you typically use. But a lot of times there's that overview or introduction stage where you're really looking at the accessibility of the particular LMS that you're using and that you're designing, and kind of adding in. A lot of times this can include, again, having kind of good contrast, having logical organization within that. There's an example checklist as someone's creating the syllabus on what are some elements that might be included. And again, a lot of times with online courses, we're adding in some additional sections maybe related to netiquette and what is that. For online syllabi, sometimes I'll even link in definitions either in the footnotes, or I will hyperlink them to an online dictionary for keywords that students might be encountering in their other academic courses to really start getting them exposed to some of those ideas. There's also kind of checklists maybe related to, again, what technology you're using. So being able to think about the textbook, and is that textbook something that you're really going to be using for the course? What other types of instructional material will you be using? What types of websites, articles, audio? And again, thinking about, I know Randall brought this up again in his plenary, is thinking about the location of your students and if they do have access to that particular website or materials. For instance, for some of our classes, students, maybe for a history class, we're needing to go online and watch a video, but some of the websites that had those videos were blocked. And so we had to come up with other ways for them to do viewings. You want to also think about maybe the, how long it would take for someone to stream it, and just some of those details based on your context and students. Again, and like I mentioned earlier, for many of our remote students, depending on their country, have not been able to access like Amazon Video, Google Play, or Amazon eBooks. So again, thinking through access for the students. There's also some questions related to accessibility or universal design. Again, being able to think about how are we having students engage? What's their interest in the topics or the activities that we're choosing? Is it appropriate for their level, for the objectives? Being able to think about how are we presenting information? Is it presented in multiple formats for students to be able to engage? What type of language or symbols are we using? And a lot of this as English instructors we're already doing, but this can be great things just to double check ourselves in, or for us to be able to even model for other types of content instructors. This checklist also goes into action and expression, which can relate to the types of ways that maybe a student can interact with materials. So sometimes that could be for a project. Maybe you have two options and students get to choose between the two options, which submission they're wanting to do. It also, again, goes through a checklist on assessment and measurement. And so this would go into the types of assessment, being able to think about the grading policy for those assessments and what rubrics have been created or provided. Thinking about, I know in the chat we talked about earlier, having realistic or authentic learning experiences for students. And again, there's a few different additional examples on this handout as well that you can look at, some other institutional checklists and the types of things that they might look at in their course design. So again, I know it can look a little bit long through that, but it can just be a helpful tool to kind of walk through and be able to look at that. So here's a few additional resources that I used as I was pulling in some of the examples as well. There's a lot of opportunities for those that are wanting to do continuing education related to instructional design. I know there's a lot of institutions that have started offering online certificates. So I don't know, has anyone started taking any certificate classes at all? It's kind of one of those things like time and money, is it worth it, right? And I think that would depend on your professional goals or how much you're really interested in course design. The ones that I've seen average for a certificate level program anywhere between 5 to 7 courses. And the tuition rates that I've seen probably vary between $500 to $750 per course. or kind of the ranges that I've seen at some of the institutions. Awesome. It sounds like Leah's done some as well. That's great. So I know that this was definitely kind of an overview level on, being able to think about, what are some of the things that maybe we think about as we're doing course design, being able to think about what are some of the templates that have been used at other schools, what are some easy ways that we could just adapt that to make it realistic for you, helpful for you. And maybe that's just picking one of these elements to start out. And whether that's just one section of this checklist that you look at each semester, whether that's even just saying, oh, I'm going to start with this course map. And that's going to be my first step, just to kind of, again, help visualize how am I being more strategic with my technology? How am I being more strategic with my activities and my assessment? And how does all of that align based on my students' level, based on my students' objectives? And being able to just take that as a step that's realistic for you as you're doing course design. But I'd love to hear, I think we just have a few more minutes, but are there any questions or comments based on your guys' experience with course design, especially with online learning?
I have more of a question.
Yeah,
We in our college in Southern Oregon, Rogue Community College in Southern Oregon, we are non-credit classes. Our adult basic skills department does not use a platform. Our credit classes uses Blackboard, and so what happens is that I'm just managing a lot of you give me suggestions on other platforms. I just find even as going back more than 20 years, Blackboard has always been super unfriendly. And the little bit that I use, I'm not like a big fan of Blackboard. So I'm looking for some other best practices platforms to manage all of my classes. So I'd be open for it.
That's a great question, Donna. I'd love to hear feedback if there's anyone else that has suggestions too. I know, one thing that would come that as you'd be making decisions will probably come into line is your budget. Especially with non-credit courses, that's even more of an, usually even more of an issue. And then access the types of computers that someone would be coming from. I know, like as Rebecca said, there's a lot of K-12 that uses Google Classrooms. And actually we have some international partners that also use Google Classrooms. And that's worked. I have a number of colleagues that have used that. One of our international partners, as I mentioned in one of the slides, is using Microsoft Teams. That is a platform, I think right now, that Microsoft has actually been providing free for education. So again, free is a nice price. With Google, Rebecca can kind of add in with Microsoft Office, there's two types when you're doing Microsoft Teams. There's ones for collaboration, and there's now one that's called the Classroom. And the collaboration one, I think, is great for like a teaching team and for a resource site that you have. And then the Classroom one is actually, honestly, it's pretty good for an LMS, a free LMS, to be able to have that, because you can have a gradebook feature. It'll do grading by points, not by categories. So that's one thing to think about. But you can do submissions, like students can upload videos, they can upload assignments, you can have them have an online like portfolio. You can also, again, do recordings and optional office hours, and you can even do chat. And so some instructors will even use that kind of for office hours, versus some of them are more comfortable than using WhatsApp or giving out personal contact information that they'll even use. Students have kind of gotten into that, and it does have an app. So depending on what type of technology students are coming into and the type of assignments that you're having them to submit, I would definitely look into the Google Classrooms or Microsoft Teams if you're looking for just a basic platform. Has anyone else had any experiences with a platform that would work better in that type of environment? That's a great question. Thanks, Donna. Yeah, I feel like there's never a perfect LMS. Like you said, I've had Blackboard at some institutions, I've had Moodle, I've had Canvas, and then my institution right now uses one that's called Populi. which is a newer and smaller one. And there's things that I like about it, but also it's like being a smaller company, it doesn't have as much integration as Canvas or some of the larger companies have. And so, so there's definitely positives and negatives to, I think, most of the ones that I've worked with. But any other questions or comments, personal experiences? Oh, and Tim also asked about Coursera. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I haven't used Coursera, but the Thinkific I've used for creating a course outside of my institution. And so a lot of people who are like selling their own courses outside of an institution will use it to build, and there are free options. And so I don't know if that might be something. It looks very much like a traditional LMS. It has all those kinds of tools, and then you pay for upgrades. I'm not trying to endorse it, but I just like might be another option.
No, that's a great one. Yeah, thanks, Tim. I have seen those and kind of interacted with those, but I haven't actually created one myself. So that would be, yeah, another research option to look at. Yeah, thanks for that, Tim. Awesome. Well, thank you again. Please do email if you wanted me to be able to email you the handout and the PowerPoint. I'm happy to share those as well. I'll put that in the chat again. Awesome. Thank you again.